Welcome to YMIN 404, often called Senior Seminar. I think officially it's actually Youth Ministry Seminar. On campus, it's generally seniors that take this course. And that's not always true, though, for our online people, that it could be at any point of your course journey. It's a little different format. The idea is to engage in a bunch of different readings and react and discuss with each other what these things might mean in terms of ministry today and how we approach students and ministry in general, and figure out what to do and how to do it better, how to do it more appropriately. But the online version we've made a little different. So there is, since it's a 7-block format, we're going to be doing a little less reading, but trying to have you reflect still with each other just like you would do on campus. So you'll notice as you look at the syllabus, there's some very I think unique, kind of different readings that you might wonder how they fit with what we talk about with youth ministry, particularly maybe the first week we're doing, which we'll talk about here in a second. So this first reading is from a book by Alan Hirsch called The Forgotten Ways, and I'll explain why I thought of this book and why I thought this reading would be interesting for you here in a bit. So several years ago, a church near our campus who had a youth minister full-time, but because of cutbacks, or they had let this person go, and they were basically running the youth ministry at the church with college students who work, maybe 10 hours a week doing internships, and they were trying to figure out what to do to go ahead. And I asked one of the students one day, I said, so what has the church decided to do? And they said, well, they're not going to go with a full-time person. They've decided the key thing to do right now is to upgrade the youth room. So I was a little surprised by that, but I said, well, people do this once in a while. And I said, so what are they doing with the youth room? And they said, well, they're redoing the whole thing, like repainting, of course, which normally youth ministries, students do this kind of thing, but they had it professionally done, and designed, new carpeting, leather couches, pretty snazzy, several state-of-the-art video screens, which this was probably 5-6 years ago, a lot more expensive than they would be today. They also had put in an also state-of-the-art coffee bar, espresso machine, and all kinds of things. And they invested $25,000 in redoing the youth room rather than putting that money into staff. Now, you could probably guess what happened when they got all this done. As you would expect, hundreds of students began showing up instantly to take advantage of the leather couch seating and the great video viewing. No, none of that happened. Nothing changed. There was still about 20 kids that were involved in the church ministry. You're probably saying, what kind of a church has $25,000 for a room remake budget? Good question. This one did. And they put it in the wrong place, because they were just trying to go like, well, what do we think is going to work? I find it interesting often in my job on campus that churches, virtually every week I get an email or a phone call from a local church that says something along the lines of, we have our youth ministry has gone into nothing, and there's no families left in our church. We're really interested in one of your college students coming in and helping us out. And so I always try and remind them, I say, well, so you expect a 19-year-old without experience and not understanding church system problems in 10 hours a week, they're going to come in and they're going to fix all these problems. It doesn't make sense. But that's what they think is going to happen. And it doesn't. So part of what we have to figure out is to go like, well, what's the best way, especially in whatever context you are in that's different from everybody else, what's the best way to try and make the youth ministry work in your location? Now, this brings me back to the book for this first week. We're not reading the whole book. We're only reading, the preface, intro, and a chapter by Alan Hirsch. So I came across Alan Hirsch a few months ago. I was at a conference for youth ministry educators. There's actually a conference of people like myself who teach at colleges and seminaries around North America. And we had a guest speaker, this Alan Hirsch, who wrote this book, and I didn't know much about him, but as the weekend went on, I became more intrigued by what he had written. And if you've already read this material, you'll know what I'm talking about. I think it's actually pretty stimulating discussion about what he calls apostolic genius. How the apostles spread the word of the church and actually created converts to Christianity a couple thousand years ago in very dramatic fashion. I love what he says. I think it's on page 4, right off the beginning in the first chapter, about look at history, about how many Christians increased in number between in the first couple centuries leading up to the time of Constantine, and it is just amazing. Particularly, you'll notice that he talks about what they were up against. They had no budgets. There was no $25,000 for a unique decoration, and there were things like really no buildings at all. It was illegal to be a member of the Christian community, and he goes on and on. It's all these things against these people, and yet the expansion of the Christian church was unreal. The numbers were just dramatic. Now, numbers isn't the key thing, of course, in life generally. We're not always just focused on numbers, but it is kind of important. If you're involved in youth ministry and you have 20 students, and then the next year you have 2 students, someone in the church is probably going to be interested in why you think that happened. And if you say numbers aren't important, you probably aren't going to keep your jobs. They're going to think that's important enough that there should be a few more students arriving. So numbers aren't critical in terms of how we do day-to-day youth ministry, it seems. But really, the goal is to think about what Jesus said about 100-fold kind of principles. That you plant and it grows and there's more seeds. This is what we hope happens in our youth ministries, not just in the church. So we want to see some growth. And Hirsch points out that it's very interesting that his little concept of apest from Ephesians 4, the church was equipped, for apostles and prophets and evangelists, shepherds / pastors and teachers. So he had these 5 designations. And he said the problem in Western civilization and the church has been too much of a focus on things such as the shepherd and the teacher, and not so much on people sent, the apostles or evangelists or prophetic. So kind of interesting, I think, to be looking at why in the world are we sometimes struggling to see fruit from ministries, and we're not doing what the apostles had done long ago with all those things against them. Somehow people kept coming to the faith because people were equipped in the church to do all 5 of these things. So you might have a denominational background where some of that is expressed more than others might have. But I think regardless, I look back at in my own experience, so much of my church ministry experience has been focused on equipping in terms of the shepherd, pastor, and the teaching role, and not so much on the other roles, especially those being sent. And so we often, I look back and wonder, not much growth happening. Maybe we weren't putting emphasis on enough of what some of the gifts might be for people. So what do we do with some of these things? Well, we got to figure out a way to see this more carefully. Now, I thought it interesting in Hirsch's first chapter, he uses the China example of what happened after the Christians and missionaries were thrown out of China, and everybody wondered in the West for decades, what happened to the Christian church? And then when in the early 70s, when China was opened up again, it was kind of amazing to discover, wow, the church is healthy. Not just the official state church, but actually a lot of these underground churches were doing quite well. So under pressure, they grew. Now I find this interesting in part because I go to a local little Chinese church. It's a long story to explain that one. I'm not Chinese. I have no Chinese background. I'm 100% Scandinavian, but somehow I ended up getting asked to help out with something at the English ministry at this little church. And I've been around this church for 7 or 8 years now, and the church has been growing rapidly. And lots of reasons to figure out why it's been growing rapidly. And in part, it was a location change that helped. But in general, I've noticed that the people at Evangelical Formosan Church are focused on more of those 5 parts of the APEST. So they're not just having pastors and teachers. They are very much focused on people being sent, sometimes back to China, sometimes to Hong Kong, sometimes to Taiwan. But they have a very strong sense of sending people into places to be spreading the word. And tied into that is evangelism. They're very focused on evangelism. I know a lot of times in my church experience, we weren't thinking about evangelism. It kind of happened. But these Chinese folks, my gosh, they are really, really intent on being, really thinking clearly about who they're sending. So, for example, in the small church, there's one full-time minister or missionary that's come out of the church community. This is a girl who's just recently out of college, and she works for Cru. Used to be Campus Crusade for Christ a few years ago. Cru, very, very focused on the idea of that she is an evangelist. She is in New York City, and she's working with college students. She's not a youth pastor up there. She is an evangelist, and she was sent. She's really an apostle to a different place. So pretty exciting what that church has been doing. But I think it's kind of interesting to just pay attention to Hirsch's idea about, well, what does this mean for ministry in general? And as we think about youth ministry, what does this mean for youth ministry, and what could some of these ideas lead us to consider? Is it about buildings? Is it about program? Is it about money and budgets, staffing? Or is it more about mission, about what we're trying to do and how we're going about doing that? And is it about working with kids and leaders, not just to pastor and teach, but also to be thinking more about evangelism and sending and being strategically focused on what is the target and the culture that we're trying to reach. Where are those teenagers in our community, and what are we doing to go out there and actually try and reach them, as opposed to, doing something fancy that brings them back to us. So I think in the writing this week, as you read and as you process this a little bit, some things to kind of look at are to answer some questions about, like, how does this affect what you're doing in a ministry you're involved in? Some of you are leading ministries, others are just attending or helping out. But to be thinking about what might be the role of thinking about APEST, apostolic genius, and how it affects and influences ministry today.